The wind howled across the empty white, as if trying to bury the past beneath layers of silence. A military helicopter sliced through the frozen sky, its echo bouncing off distant ridges. It landed near a cabin, weather-beaten, forgotten, and half swallowed by snow. From the chopper, a general stepped down slowly. His boots crunched into ice. He didn't speak. He didn't look around. His eyes locked on an old axe buried in a stump, a faded military insignia carved deep into its handle. He froze, then, without hesitation, snapped to attention and saluted. One of the younger soldiers whispered, "Who the hell lives out here?" No one answered, because the man inside once saved the lives of men who now ran the world. Jacob Hill had lived more than 2 decades in a wooden cabin, clinging to the edge of Montana's northern wilderness. A place where winter didn't visit, it stayed. He was over 70 now, with a face carved by time and wind, a beard like frost on pine bark, and eyes that seemed to see farther than the horizon. To the townspeople a few miles down the slope, he was no longer Jacob. They hadn't used his real name in years. Instead, they called him something colder. The madman on the mountain? No one truly remembered when he came. Some said it was in the blizzard of '98. Others swore it was even earlier. He arrived alone, carrying nothing but an old canvas pack, a sharpened axe, and a small wooden picture frame wrapped in cloth. No power, no phone, no mailbox, no visitors. He didn't wave when folks passed. He never came to town unless absolutely necessary. He never spoke unless spoken to, and even then, rarely. There were whispers, naturally. He's some kind of broken soldier, from some war the government doesn't talk about. Kids made up stories. Teens dared each other to hike up to his cabin and knock. A few tried. None stayed long. Every fall, as the first snows fell, locals would gather over coffee and speculate. This might be the winter that finally takes him. They said it every year, and every spring, when the snow began to melt, a faint wisp of smoke would curl from his chimney again. A narrow path would appear, shoveled neatly by hand like always, and Jacob was still alive. Inside his tiny, creaking cabin, there was little more than the essentials. A rusted wood stove, still burning hot through the worst storms. A weathered axe, its blade polished, its handle worn smooth by time. And a faded wooden picture frame resting on the windowsill, facing the northern tree line. Inside that frame was an old photograph, black and white, slightly curled at the edges. A group of young soldiers stood in the snow, faces proud and tired. One stood in the middle, stone-faced, arms crossed. That was Jacob. Years ago, he never talked about his past. But those who'd lived in the valley long enough had heard pieces of a story. A legend, really. He was a soldier, one of the elite. His unit was ambushed somewhere cold. Maybe Siberia, maybe Alaska. They say he saved his team, but got left behind. There were no medals, no plaques, no military parades. Just a man with a scar down his left hand, a fire in his cabin, and eyes that still scanned the trees like he was watching for something. The only person who still visited, or tried to, was Lily, a young nurse from the town clinic. Every month during winter, she would hike halfway up the mountain, leave a parcel of supplies, dried bread, painkillers, canned stew, and walk away without waiting. She never knocked. Once, just once, she turned back early and saw something she would never forget. Jacob standing beneath a snow-covered pine, one hand on his chest, head slightly bowed, not waving, not stretching, saluting, to the north, to no one, or maybe to someone long gone. General Clayton Reeve hadn't spoken since stepping off the helicopter. His boots crunched across the frozen ground as he moved toward the old tree stump where the axe stood buried. Soldiers around him looked confused, even uneasy, but the general didn't waver. His gaze was fixed, not on the cabin, not on the snow, but on the axe. The closer he got, the deeper the silence became. Then he saw it, a faint carving, nearly swallowed by years of frost and wear. A mark, no bigger than a thumbprint, carved into the handle of the axe. A circle, a diagonal slash, 2 dots beneath. To most, it would mean nothing. But to Reeve, It punched through 3 decades of silence, like a bullet through glass. He reached out slowly, brushing away the snow with his gloved hand. His breath caught. He whispered under his breath, "Fog Division." The young lieutenant beside him furrowed his brow. "Sir?" But Reeve didn't answer. His mind had already left the present. 35 years earlier, deep inside the frozen wilderness of Siberia, an elite American unit known as Fog Division carried out a mission so classified it was never recorded in public records. It was cold, the kind of cold that splits steel and silenced screams. An 8-man infiltration unit had been dropped deep behind enemy lines in northern Siberia. Their mission was simple on paper: disable a communication outpost without being detected. No footprints, no gunfire, no bodies. They were Fog Division, a unit so secretive it didn't officially exist. Their creed: disappear in plain sight. Among them was Sergeant Jacob Hill, their lead scout and cold-weather survivalist. Silent, brilliant, lethal when needed, invisible when not. But things had gone wrong. A sentry spotted them. The perimeter mines were active. An emergency evacuation was ordered, but the team was pinned. In a matter of seconds, they were surrounded by enemy snipers, sensors, and an active radar tower scanning the forest. And that's when Jacob disappeared. For 2 days, the team assumed he was dead. They heard distant movement, saw flares, and expected the worst. But then, one by one, the threats vanished. Patrols pulled back. Static filled the enemy radar. By dawn of the 3rd day, Jacob returned, limping, frozen, missing half a hand, but alive. In his remaining hand, he clutched a bloodied axe. Not standard issue, but hand-carved. The same one now buried in that stump in Montana. He didn't say what he did, but they knew. He'd dismantled a radar station alone. He'd created a false trail that led enemy scouts away. He'd destroyed every sign of their presence, including their own extraction markers. And when the chopper finally came, he stayed behind to buy them minutes. They begged Command to turn back. Command refused. He was declared MIA, presumed dead. And Fog Division, being off the books, couldn't even name him in the report. The story ended. The mission was successful. His name erased. Back in the snow-covered clearing, General Reeve stood stiff, breathing hard, his eyes glassy. This wasn't just a forgotten veteran. This wasn't a ghost. This was the man who saved his life. Reeve had been the youngest member of that team, barely 23. Jacob had thrown him down in the snow when the mines activated. Jacob had yelled for him to run, and he did. He never saw Jacob again, until now. Reeve looked up at the cabin, tears freezing at the corners of his eyes. All those years, all the medals, the promotions, all built on the bones of a man no one had honored. Jacob never asked to be found. He never demanded recognition. But somehow, that axe had endured, and it still bore the insignia of a unit that no longer existed, except in the memories of a few survivors. A unit called Fog Division. And Jacob Hill was its last living shadow. In the town of Gray Hollow, nestled beneath the shadow of Montana's northern range, people talked about Jacob Hill the way folks talk about storms that won't pass. Not with fear, but with a kind of tired disapproval, like something they wished would just go away. He wasn't a war hero in their eyes. He wasn't even a veteran worth respecting. He was just the man in the cabin, the recluse, the failed survivor, a man who returned from war, but never returned to life. To many in town, Jacob's existence was uncomfortable. He reminded them of the kind of sacrifice they didn't want to think about too deeply, the kind that wasn't wrapped in flags or parades, but in frostbite, silence, and years of solitude. Teenagers told stories about him. He talks to trees. He buries weapons in the snow. He once disappeared for weeks and came back with blood on his boots. It became a game. Some would hike just close enough to throw rocks at his cabin. Small ones mostly, meant to startle, to prove they'd been there. One winter, a group of local boys found the axe he kept in the stump out front and tried to set it on fire. They laughed as it smoked, not knowing that axe had once been carried through frozen hell. They didn't understand. No one had told them. And Jacob, true to his nature, never said a word. Over time, most folks just ignored him. They'd pass by his cabin on hunting trips or from the logging road and shake their heads. Still alive, huh? Hard to kill what's already broken. He never came into town unless absolutely necessary. When he did, people stared, not out of curiosity, but out of discomfort, like looking at a scar they didn't want to acknowledge. But there was one person who saw him differently. Her name was Lily Carver, the town's nurse, practical and kind, raised by her grandfather who'd served in Vietnam. From a young age, Lily had learned that not all soldiers came home the same, and some didn't talk about the war, ever. So while others mocked or ignored Jacob, Lily chose silence too, a different kind. The kind that leaves food quietly on a tree stump once a month. The kind that slips a folded blanket near his porch when the temperature drops below zero. She never knocked, never stayed. She simply left, trusting he'd take what he needed, and he always did. She never saw his face, not up close, not until one night. That winter, the snow came early and hard. The trail to Jacob's cabin was nearly lost beneath 2 feet of powder. Still, Lily hiked halfway up, as always, to leave a parcel of medicine and dried bread. But as she turned to go, something made her pause. A faint light flickered from the cabin window. She stepped off the trail just far enough to see, and there he was. Jacob stood outside, coat heavy, unmoving, framed by the falling snow. The wind howled across the trees, yet he didn't flinch. He was facing north, toward the mountains, standing tall, right hand raised in a perfect military salute. There was no one else, no flag, no audience, just an old man, alone in the snow, paying respect to something or someone long gone. Lily didn't call out. She didn't take a photo. She just stood there in the dark, watching. And in that moment, the rumors disappeared. The jokes, the judgment, all of it vanished beneath the weight of a silence that demanded nothing, but deserved everything. That night, Lily returned to town and told no one what she saw. But from then on, she called him by his name. Not the hermit, not the ghost, but Mr. Hill. Because now she understood. He wasn't hiding. He was remembering. And some memories are too sacred to speak out loud. The storm had passed, but the sky remained heavy, bruised with gray, streaked with cold wind. At precisely 800 hours, the roar of rotor blades echoed across Gray Hollow Valley. Children looked up. Old men stepped out onto their porches. Snow lifted in spirals as the Black Hawk helicopter sliced through the stillness, heading north toward the mountains. No one in the town knew where it was going, but General Clayton Reeve did. He sat stone-faced inside the aircraft, clutching a sealed folder stamped with red ink. It had been locked for 35 years, declassified only hours earlier at his personal request. Inside were 3 items. A grainy photo of an elite Cold War unit called Fog Division, a satellite image of a weathered axe with a forgotten insignia, and a single handwritten note, MIA presumed dead, Sergeant Jacob Hill, last seen near Operation White Echo, 1989. As the helicopter touched down on a snowy clearing just 50 yards from Jacob's cabin, the wind stirred flakes into a whirlwind. A squad of 6 soldiers disembarked first, scanning the perimeter with quiet precision. To their eyes, this was just another backwoods survivalist, another deranged recluse. They moved carefully, weapons holstered but eyes sharp. One soldier murmured, "This place looks abandoned." Another added, "No tracks, no smoke. He's probably frozen inside." But then, a click. The cabin door creaked open, and Jacob Hill stood there, alive, still, eyes steady, shoulders square, no emotion, no surprise. He looked straight at them like he'd known they were coming all along. The soldiers froze. Something in the air shifted, some unspoken pressure, as if they just stepped into sacred ground. Then slowly from the helicopter, General Reeve descended. His boots met the snow with a soft crunch. He wore no overcoat, just his uniform, ribbons sharp against his chest. His breath fogged in front of him, but he didn't seem to notice the cold. He walked forward, step by deliberate step, until he reached the old tree stump. The axe was still there, its handle frosted, but the symbol now clear beneath the snow. Reeve stared. Then he turned toward Jacob. The soldiers tensed, waiting for orders, questions, something. But instead, Reeve snapped to attention and raised his hand in a sharp salute. The air stopped. Even the wind seemed to go silent. No one moved. It was the youngest soldier, Private Langley, who finally whispered, "Sir, why are you saluting him?" But Sergeant Davis, the eldest in the squad, shook his head slowly. His eyes didn't leave Jacob. "It's not just a salute, it's the protocol, reserved for those whose service was never recognized. Because it couldn't be." Langley blinked. "You mean like covert ops?" Davis nodded. "Worse. Deep black. Beyond black. This man didn't just serve. He disappeared so others could live." Jacob didn't return the salute. He simply stepped forward, out onto the snow, until he stood across from Reeve. Two men, one passed. No words passed between them, just a quiet acknowledgement that needed no explanation. Then Jacob looked down at the folder in Reeve's hand and said simply, "You opened it." Reeve nodded. "I owed you that much." Jacob's eyes scanned the soldiers behind him, then the helicopter, then the axe. He sighed. "So it finally caught up." Reeve's voice softened. "We didn't come to drag you back, Sergeant. We came to salute you properly, even if it's 35 years late." Behind them, the soldiers had gone quiet. Some lowered their heads, unsure of what to say. The snow began to fall again. Soft, steady, peaceful. But the silence wasn't empty anymore. It was filled with something deeper. Respect earned through silence, sacrifice, and survival. Reeve extended his arm, offering Jacob the folder. But Jacob didn't take it. Instead, he turned to the axe, ran a gloved hand along its handle, and whispered, "This was enough." Reeve nodded slowly, not pressing further. The salute had been made, the message received, and for the first time in decades, Jacob Hill had been seen. Inside the cabin, it was warm. Not cozy, nothing about Jacob Hill's home invited comfort, but steady. A fire crackled low in the stove. Cast iron pans hung from the wall, their blackened surfaces seasoned by decades of solitude. A cot, a handmade shelf of books, a lantern, and a single wooden table. General Reeves stood near the doorway, helmet removed, steam rising off his uniform as the heat embraced him. Jacob didn't offer coffee. He didn't need to. They sat across from each other in silence. Two ghosts who'd outlived the battlefield. Finally, Jacob broke it. "I didn't die out there." His voice was gravel and wind, quiet but edged with iron. "I was just forgotten." Reeve closed his eyes briefly, as if the words punched deeper than expected. When he opened them again, there was no rank in them, no command, just a man confronting the cost of his own survival. "I know," he said softly, "and I'm sorry, Jacob, for all of it, for leaving you behind, for not questioning the report, for moving on like your silence didn't cost you everything." Jacob leaned back slightly. The firelight flickered across his face, carving out the years etched into his skin. "You were a kid, Reeve. We all were. We followed orders. Some of us got medals. Some of us disappeared." Reeve set the folder on the table between them. He didn't open it. Instead, he reached into his coat and pulled out something wrapped in oilcloth. Old, frayed at the edges. Jacob watched, expression unreadable. Reeve unwrapped it slowly, revealing a weather-stained tactical map, creased and annotated in pencil. Not a copy. The original. Jacob raised an eyebrow. "Didn't think they'd let that see daylight." Reeve chuckled grimly. "They didn't. I pulled it from a vault. Risked my stars for it." Jacob reached forward, fingers trembling slightly, and laid the map flat. His eyes scanned the familiar notations. Ridge lines, wind patterns, patrol routes. Dozens of tiny red marks made in pencil. "These were mine," Jacob muttered. "Every patrol shift, every footstep." He paused, then added with quiet pride, "I walked that grid for 9 nights. Alone." Reeve nodded. "We thought you were dead. Then every Russian team pulled back like someone flipped a switch. We never understood how we got out until now." Jacob didn't respond immediately. Instead, he reached beneath the table and pulled out a worn leather journal. He slid it toward Reeve. Inside were sketches, timestamps, fragments of intercepted codes, even an account of the final hours of the operation, all written in neat, sharp handwriting. Reeve turned a page and stopped. It was a photograph, torn, faded, fog division, lined up in the snow, the original group before the mission. He stared at it. His own young face stared back. Jacob watched him for a moment, then said, "You know why I kept all this?" Reeve shook his head. "Because someone had to remember, even if no one asked." Then Jacob turned toward the corner of the room, where the axe now rested against a beam. Reeve followed his gaze, then stood and walked over. He reached out, slowly tracing a line on the handle, a carved handprint stylized, with the initials CR carved below it in small square letters. His eyes widened. "You marked this." Jacob nodded once. "The night before the mission. You were scared, couldn't sleep. I handed you that axe and told you to put your hand on something solid." Reeve exhaled, the weight of memory returning all at once. "I thought you were just distracting me." "I was," Jacob said, then smiled faintly. "But I didn't think you'd actually carve your name in it." They both laughed. Quiet, hoarse laughter, the kind that only came from shared pain worn down by time. Reeve turned serious again, looking at the axe, the journal, the map, the man before him. "We owe you more than a medal, Jacob." Jacob shook his head. "I didn't come back for medals. I came back because I didn't want to die knowing no one made it." "But we did," Reeve said, "because of you." Silence settled again, but this time it wasn't heavy. It was full. Jacob leaned forward and rested his hands on the table. His voice was steady. "Then that's enough." Reeve stood. So did Jacob. The general offered a firm handshake, not out of formality, but something deeper. Gratitude. Closure. Jacob took it. No parade, no cameras, no public. Just two soldiers, one room, and the long overdue truth between them. Jacob didn't get on the helicopter. General Reeve had offered, gently, respectfully, asking if he wanted to return to base, to Washington, to a ceremony, even to a quiet veteran's home where he'd be looked after. Jacob had simply shaken his head. "This is home now," he said. "I made peace with the silence. I don't need anything louder than the trees." Reeve didn't argue. He didn't insist. Instead, for the first time in decades, he stepped inside Jacob's cabin. Not as a general, but as an old friend, a fellow survivor. That moment, quiet, small, and deeply human, was the first time Jacob had ever let anyone into his sanctuary. No one else from the team entered. No cameras followed. No reporter stood by. Just the quiet crackle of the fire, the creak of old floorboards, and the last conversation between two men whose stories had been buried under snow and secrecy for too long. At dawn the next morning, the valley echoed again, this time not with one helicopter, but two, and a line of olive-drab military vehicles snaked slowly up the frozen trail, their engines humming through the forest silence. Gray Hollow's townspeople watched from afar, stunned. They'd never seen anything like it. Uniformed soldiers formed a line outside Jacob's cabin. No orders shouted, no weapons raised, just solemn faces and a silence heavier than sound. Then, with full honors, the axe, the very one Jacob had buried in that stump for decades, was lifted, wrapped carefully, and placed inside a case. Not a weapons locker, not a museum display behind glass, but a memorial, handcrafted and polished, made of walnut and steel, later installed in the Hall of Unsung Valor at the National Military Museum. Beneath the axe, engraved in quiet silver lettering, read the words, "The blade that never forgot, the man who never asked to be remembered." Jacob didn't attend the unveiling. He stayed in his cabin as always. But for the first time, something changed. The townspeople stopped calling him names. Teenagers no longer threw rocks. A local carpenter, without asking, repaired the broken rail on Jacob's porch. And Lily, the nurse who had left those quiet parcels for years, returned one crisp morning. This time not with medical supplies, but a small box wrapped in brown paper. She left it by his door, then turned and walked back down the path without a word. Inside the box was a bar of dark chocolate, a thermos of hot tea, and a handwritten note. It read, "I know you never needed anyone to know who you are, but I still wanted to say thank you for staying." Lily Jacob read it slowly, then placed it beside the photo on his windowsill. The photo of Fog Division, faded and torn, but still standing proud. He didn't smile, but his eyes softened. And that night, for the first time in years, he left a lantern burning in the window until dawn. There was no final speech, no television story, no salute from the president. But maybe that was the point. Jacob Hill wasn't looking to be remembered. He simply wanted to make sure others were never forgotten. And in the quiet of the mountains, with the snow falling once more, and the axe no longer in the stump but finally at peace, one truth remained. Sometimes silence is the loudest act of honor. The cabin glowed gently in the firelight. Inside the cabin, the fire in the wood stove burns low, casting gentle flickers of orange light across the wooden walls. The wind howls outside, distant but familiar. No longer a threat, just a companion to the silence. Jacob Hill sits in his old wooden chair, wrapped in a thick wool blanket. His boots rest on the worn floorboards. In one hand, a tin mug of something warm. In the other, gently resting across his lap, the axe handle, or rather, what's left of it. The blade is gone, sent to the world below, but the memory remains in the grain of the wood. His eyes are fixed on the window where snow falls quietly beyond the glass. He doesn't move. He doesn't speak. He doesn't need to. The lantern beside him flickers with a steady flame, small, defiant, alive. Not everyone who goes silent has been forgotten. Not everyone who walks away from the world walks away from honor. Some men leave no stories behind, no medals, no monuments, just a trail in the snow, a cabin in the woods, and an axe, sharp enough to split history, quiet enough to be missed by time, but heavy enough to make an entire generation bow their heads. Jacob Hill's story may have ended in silence, but what he stood for still echoes, louder than medals, louder than headlines. In a world that often values noise over meaning and recognition over character, Jacob reminds us of a forgotten truth. Some of the greatest acts of service are never seen. Some of the strongest souls choose not to speak, but they still shape the world around them. He didn't ask to be remembered. He didn't demand justice. He simply kept living with honor, with quiet purpose, in a world that had moved on without him. And maybe that's a lesson we all need today. In this fast-paced modern life, where everything is posted, rated, shared, and judged, what happens to the quiet people? What about the veterans who came home to no parades, the grandparents whose stories were never written down, the everyday heroes who never asked for thanks? Jacob's story calls out to all of us to slow down, to listen, and to look closer. Sometimes the quietest person in the room is the one who once carried the heaviest burden. Now, we'd love to hear from you. Have you ever known someone like Jacob? A neighbor? A father? A friend who never talked about what they lived through, but whose presence shaped your life? Or maybe, are you someone who's carried something in silence? Leave a comment below. We read everyone. And this is a space where stories like Jacob's deserve to be remembered. And if this story touched something in you, if it made you think or feel or remember, please consider liking this video, subscribing to our channel, and sharing it with someone who might need to hear it today. Because sometimes the people who need these stories most are the ones who say the least. Thank you for joining us. And to all who have served in silence or in uniform, we see you, we remember, and we honor you, even when the world forgets. Until next time, keep watching closely. Sometimes the axe left in the snow says more than 1,000 words ever could.